Welcome to Biz Help for You with host Candy Messer. Entrepreneurs like to focus on the big picture, like profitability, success, and a smooth running organization. There always seems to be those little things like taxes, employee compensation, laws, regulations, and more. Now, you can get the answers you need in one place. Join us today as we break it all down for you. Now, here is your host, Candy Messer.
Hello and welcome to Biz Help for You with Candy Messer. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found the information on last week's show, the number one secret to getting booked and staying booked even now, informative. If you are unable to listen and you would like to find the links, you can find them on iTunes and my Facebook page, as well as YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. If there are topics you'd find beneficial or questions you have, please feel free to reach out to me at media@abandp.com. Now, let's learn a little bit about our guest. Jimmy Kinmartin is a California licensed property, casualty, and accident health insurance broker. He began his career in the business insurance industry in 2007 at ISU, the Olson Duncan Agency in Torrance. He received his formal education from Loyola Marymount University, where he received a Bachelor of Arts degree with a minor in business administration. He earned his Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter, the CPCU designation, in April 2014. The CPCU designation is widely considered the most distinguished designation offered in the insurance industry. Achieving the designation requires completion of 8 phases covering topics such as risk management, insurance operations, business law, finance and accounting, property insurance, and liability insurance. Jimmy's focus is working with small to mid-sized businesses, assisting them with their risk management insurance needs. Jimmy grew up in Fullerton and currently lives in Orange County today with his wife and 2 daughters. So thanks for joining me today, Jim. How are you doing?
Hey, Candy. How's it going today?
Good. Thank you for joining us. I know you were a guest on my show last year, but for anyone who maybe didn't hear that show, doesn't know about you, heard a little bit on your bio, but can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you actually got started as an insurance broker?
For sure. Yes. So I did start in the industry back in 2007. As the jokes always go in our industry, you don't really aspire to be an insurance broker, when you're in college or looking ahead at your future. But I had the luxury and the benefit of knowing my current principal of my agency was a mutual friend of mine who was looking to really groom and mentor somebody into the industry and make a career out of it, which is where I was at my time of my life. I was 27 years old, no family yet or anything like that, looking to build a career. So, fast forward, here I am 13 years later, been working at ISU, the Olson Duncan Agency, and building a career out of this. And, it's been a really good 13 years. And at this point, I'm an insurance geek, and I really like everything I do every day. So I think this is it. This is where I'll be from now until I retire.
Nice. Well, it is something important. It's the same thing. People don't always think they want to, do bookkeeping or payroll or any of the stuff that we do too, because a lot of people just don't like math or, don't want to do that, so they're not always seen as the fun careers, but they're both important, right? So
100%.
Mm-hmm. So I want to start talking, first of all, on what type of business insurance really do entrepreneurs need? I think there's, some misunderstanding because there's so many different types of insurance. So if you just want to give a brief overview first of just generally what they might need, and then we can go into more detail on each one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with insurance and specifically property and casualty insurance, there's a good 10 different lines or buckets of insurance that apply to that. No business is the same. I mean, you can look at 2 businesses and they don't have the same risk exposure. So our job is really to drill down and really determine where their exposures are, their risk exposures, and then build protection and coverage around that. Like we talked about in our prior interview together, I mean, at its core, I'd say most businesses all need some degree of general liability coverage. That's probably the number one area of insurance, if I could pinpoint one, that everybody has an exposure to, but beyond that, I think work comp, general liability would be the two most common, and where they need to be in those spectrums is also different. But no doubt, those are the two common insurance coverages
Right.
that all businesses have risk exposures for.
And I think we probably should just mention too, I mean, I think it's in most states. I mean, there might be one or two, maybe this isn't the case, but from what I understand, workers' compensation, if you don't have it and they find out you don't have it, they can come and literally shut you down that day until you can actually get insurance in place. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not, I don't see those stories happen often, but it's happened. Yeah, I've gotten calls with somebody saying, gosh, we had someone come by our office, we are locked out, and literally, and we need to get a policy quick because of that. I don't think there's people really on the hunt out there trying to pinpoint people that don't have work comp, but it happens. And I
Right.
think, you obviously want to be compliant before that ever becomes the case. Most importantly, because if you do have an employee that gets hurt, then it's
Right.
going to be coming out on your pocket. So don't try and cheat the system, I guess, is what it comes down to.
Right. And I think one other thing we probably should touch on in that before we move on the different types of insurance, though, too, because I know there's so many to cover, is understanding when they have to cover independent contractors and when they don't, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but it gets a little confusing. So can you touch on that for someone who maybe doesn't understand why they would even need to have coverage?
Yeah, for sure. And here in California, this is always evolving with this AB5 ruling that was really starting to be enforced as of, I think, July this year. But for the most part, if you have a lot of direction and control over your employees, I mean, if they're in your industry, if you're say a bookkeeper, if you're hiring somebody to help you on a independent contractor basis, part-time, doing bookkeeping itself, I mean, chances are, no matter what, even if you don't have a lot of direction and control, you're probably going to be responsible for covering their work comp, because the carrier will pay the cost of their work-related injuries if it ever came to that. But at the same time, if you're a bookkeeping company and using some kind of marketing person to help generate sales for your business, that might be a totally different industry, might not have as much as an impact and the need to carry work comp for somebody outside of your field of work. But at the end of the day, if you have any questions, I mean, you definitely should be talking to either an employment attorney or, if it's accounting specific or insurance specific, talking to your partner on those sides of things, because it's just not one size fits all.
Right. I think the main times I've seen it become an issue is really like in the construction industry or something too. Like if the worker doesn't already have their own license and they're not already covered on their own policy, even if it's a subcontractor, it's not an employee, you're supposed to have them covered. So I thought, well, we probably should at least touch on that.
Good point. And that's a big thing. I mean, if you're working with an independent contractor and they do carry their own work comp insurance, you get a certificate of insurance reflecting that. And there's going to be no questions. You get audited. You show that certificate to the carrier auditor, and that would alleviate any gray area right there. So that's a good point.
Right. So you were talking earlier about general liability, and that's what pretty much everyone needs too. So to help explain the difference too, because I know there's some other ones that include the word liability in there too, and people don't always understand the difference. What is general liability specifically, and what does it cover?
General liability is specifically covering you in the event a client, a customer, a third party brings a claim of negligence against you for bodily injury or property damage. It might be a situation where they're visiting your premises and slip and fall, get hurt, hold you negligent as the business owner. Or product liability is also entailed within general liability. You make a product, somebody gets hurt using your product and wants to hold you liable for their injuries. That's the core of general liability. And finally, if you're in a business where you're like a contractor, there's the completed operations aspect. You do a job at somebody's premises. After your job is completed and you're off the premises, if anything were to happen, somebody gets hurt because of your default work or something along those lines, general liability is going to protect you from a claim others bring against you.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that so many people are working from home, I mean, we had home-based businesses before too, but now, especially with COVID and most people can't be in their office. I mean, if they're set up for any capability of working from home or elsewhere remotely. That's ideally what they're doing. So if someone is working from their home, can they get an additional like rider on their home insurance, or must they have a separate policy?
They pretty much need to have a separate policy. I don't really encounter a lot of personal lines homeowners insurance carriers that allow for any type of business exposure. I mean, not to say that there's some that might be out there that I'm unaware of, but you're always going to have to pretty much separate the business from the personal. And
Right.
not to go off on a tangent, but I mean, if you are a small independent home-based business, don't be thinking $1 million policy is going to cost you $100,000 a year. It's really kind of meets the exposure where it's very inexpensive if you do in fact need to get a liability policy specific to your business operations.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think there's just some confusion that it's just going to be super expensive, but like you said, it's probably also dependent on the industry or the business size or things like that too, correct?
100%. Yeah. If you're a bookkeeper, a consultant, and you might have a higher E&O, errors and emissions exposure, but your general liability exposure, you don't have people coming onto your premises. You don't go see many people. I mean, you're not swinging hammers and creating a lot of risk. There's not going to be a lot of costs associated with your coverage. I mean, you can get a $1 million liability policy for as little as $400 or $500 a year, depending on the carrier. So,
right. And like you said, then that liability insurance is covering those who aren't employed, and that's where the workers' compensation is for those who are employed. So that's where they kind of go hand in hand, correct?
That's right. Yeah. If an employee of yours gets hurt, I mean, the thing to remember is general liability is if a third party, somebody outside of your business, brings a claim against you. If your employee gets hurt, of course, that falls into work comp, and that's what the big differentiator is right there.
Right. So then, is business insurance required by law?
Really, the only requirement for the most part you'll see is work comp. You have employees on your payroll. State laws do require you to carry work comp insurance. Outside of work comp, really the only requirements come from like a contract with another party. But state or government-wise, work comp is the one that is required by law if you have employees.
Right. And that's a good point when you mentioned that too, in terms of contracts. I mean, I know too, I've seen things for either myself or clients sometimes that they'll say they want to see, even like my landlord at one point wanted to see that I was covered and that they were like secondarily covered. So that's kind of when you really see that happening.
Exactly. Yeah, especially you talk about a landlord. That's a big one. That's where we get a lot of calls. You're entering a lease. The landlord has the 25-page lease agreement.
Right.
There's always that insurance clause in there. And the biggest area that you're going to find every landlord wanting is you to carry as a tenant general liability coverage, so that, and they'll commonly ask for you to name them as an additional insured on your policy.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, the reason for that is if you do have someone coming on site to your office, they get hurt, you're the negligent party. Well, the building owner doesn't want to have to pay out of pocket for your negligence. So your policy essentially becomes the first line of defense. And then of course the landlord has their own insurance, but it's kind of limiting their risk by doing it that way. That's probably the number one reason why we get calls in our office is somebody entering into a new lease where it's required by contract to carry that coverage specifically.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, another type of insurance is the EPLI. So can you explain, to listeners what that means and what does it cover?
EPLI is short for Employment Practices Liability. If you're in California, you probably have a good sense of the term. It's also, of course, a form of liability. We're not talking bodily injury, property damage. It's more of that employer-employee relationship. If you are an employer, ever have an allegation or suit for wrongful termination, sexual harassment, failure to hire, failure to promote, list goes on pretty deep. But that specifically would be needed if you are an employer to defend yourself from claims an employee brings against you. It could not only just be an employee; it could be an applicant, it could be a former employee. But if you do have a suit in any way alleging mismanagement in those areas I just mentioned, that's not general liability coverage. You would need employment practices.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a biggie here in California. The litigiousness that we find,
Right.
and it's becoming even more so in this era that we're in, with just social stuff going on socially with the maybe Me Too movement, or just a race and gender. So yeah, that's a big. I'd say that's a close third behind general liability and work comp, where employers should really have to think about picking up that coverage because of the exposure they have there.
Right. Actually, in California, of course, too, we had to have sexual harassment training for all of our staff, by January 1st of 2021. And I know one of the statistics that they had on there was, one of the suits that was filed was for age discrimination, and it was like $1 million, payout. And then there was another one, I forget the specifics, but it was maybe like 3 million. And then sexual harassment was like $60 million or something. I mean, I might be wrong on the figure, but they were saying that these payouts are so huge now on these cases. So it's really important to have that protection, because obviously that's going to put any business out of business if someone brings a claim and wins a case.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why too. It is getting costlier, and mostly because of these claims. I think a lot of people just assume that I pick up a policy because it will help cover damages that are awarded against me. But I think the most important element to these is the defense coverage you get. Even if it's a frivolous allegation that doesn't carry any ground, I mean, you're going to have to defend yourself. And
Right.
part of that limit that you carry, you might have $1 million limit employment practices liability policy, but after a year-long court battle, that whole bucket might be drained and just defending your business in a suit. So that's probably the biggest part, is the defense element to the coverage.
So important. And like you said, I mean, you hope you never have a frivolous claim against you, but if you do, it's going to cost a lot of money just to go through, that whole process, just to prove you really didn't do anything wrong, which, is a negative side of that ability for employees. But I understand, they want to be able to protect employees as well. So
yeah, something to add that too is the good thing about these policies, if you do purchase one, is the carriers don't want to pay claims either. So there is an HR element to them, where by buying a policy, you actually have carrier. I don't know of any carriers that don't have this option, but they basically have a help desk, 24/7 help desk, a number you can call, or a link that you could access where you can connect with California or whatever state you're in, employment professionals. And they basically, if you have a situation going on, I don't know, whether you need to discipline an employee, potentially let them go. Well, before making a decision that you're not, professionally, you don't know what the outcome could be. You actually consult with an attorney or an HR professional. They kind of help you walk through, like, how should we deal with this, so that they can help prevent a claim. So I'd say just that alone is probably the most important part about buying a policy like this. And I can't tell you how many times people have, after they bought a policy, maybe months down the line, when a claim actually happens, when they, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you, like, just that part alone is everything to me, just to have that consultation. So yeah, that's a big piece of the EPLI coverage that most might not even think about it at all. So
I agree. It's important too, because you might think you're terminating someone for cause, attendance issues or, different things. I mean, attendance is pretty black and white, but maybe there's an issue, you've had to reprimand someone and you think you have good cause, and you terminate someone, and then they come with some type of discrimination suit, and you didn't even see that was there. So by talking to someone ahead of time, they can say, well, are there any of these potential red flags that we need to really look at first? And so I think that's a fabulous asset, to having that insurance, because you
100%.
can reach out and ask those questions and make sure you're doing everything right. Even if you think you're in the right, like, they can say, yes, everything's great, or you might want to be careful, maybe do something else. So I think,
and you get, you're, as a business owner, you're passionate, I'm going to get this guy, or you just, you really just kind of stay in your lane, let them kind of consult on how to handle it, so it doesn't become a bigger issue. And well, I was going to add to that, one big thing too, because of how litigious our world is, and the deductibles on these policies are getting kind of high. I mean, if you're in LA County, you might be looking at, like, they call them retentions, but you could be looking at a minimum retention of $25,000 out of pocket before these policies kick in. But they also have clauses in these contracts. If you consult with that hotline to help, you talk to an experienced professional on the carrier side before you make a decision, well, they might chop your deductible down because you consulted with them
Right.
first. So it's helps with the out of pocket as well when you
That's
they want
good.
to
I
encourage you
actually
to
didn't
use
know
their service. Yeah.
that's good information. Mhm. So we talked about general liability, and then you briefly had mentioned professional liability. So I would love for you to talk about really what is the difference between general liability and professional liability.
With general liability, just to emphasize, you're talking about claims brought against you for bodily injury or property damage. On professional liability, which is also referred to as errors and omissions, like it's going to protect you for your professional malpractice. So if you're offering a service to others for a fee, a bookkeeper, an insurance broker, it's like a doctor carrying malpractice. If your decisions, if your guidance to somebody else, it caused them any kind of financial harm and they want to hold you liable for it. Jimmy, you told me to do this and I did, and now I'm suffering a financial loss. I'm going to hold you liable for it. That's the errors and omissions side, the professional liability side. And it's really critical for anybody in the business of offering a service to others for a fee. You talk about attorneys. Like a bookkeeper, an accountant might have a higher degree of exposure for than a contractor or something like that. But it's still there, and that's the main emphasis behind errors and omissions is for your professional negligence.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that too. Is it more like in the legal and financial, or are there other industries maybe that would still need that professional injury? Because it does seem like, yes, a CPA made a mistake on a tax return and it cost them, extra taxes. I can see where that is. Or an attorney gave some information and they're still, lost their suit or something like that makes sense. But if there's other specific industries maybe that fall under that maybe don't seem as obvious, that would be good to know.
Yeah. It even goes as deep as hairstylists, light industries. I mean, there's always that little boundary, what's professional liability, what's general liability. But yeah, I mean, you could be a hairstylist and mess someone's hair up, burn their hair out, or I don't know, something along those lines. And well, does that constitute a general liability claim or a professional claim? Those are some areas that you might not so much think about these every day. These aren't people, these aren't bookkeepers, accountants, lawyers. They're just everyday, hairstylists or
right.
Geez, I'm just trying to think, even contractors, they do, if they're giving advice to others, they're not just building, like if you're a general contractor building somebody's house, you might also be like telling them you should do it this way or that way. And you're offering guidance. So then you do have this exposure for professional liability that you might not know about. So, it's really important outside of, I mean, I can't really think of any specific, like odd business off the top of my head right here now, but,
well, I was thinking, what about like coaches or consultants or something? Because they're mentoring or guiding, and maybe they suggest, that would be a great product
100%.
to take to market.
Yeah. I can just using my own experience. I even have a client that is a lot of ex-Olympians, and they are coaching, like they're being mentors to youth in whatever sport you're helping them not only with their game and skill, but you're also kind of guiding them on you're trying to put them on a path to like aspire to be where they have been. And it's things to say, but you might have a parent, well, my kid never became an Olympian and we paid you all this money and we want to hold you liable. That didn't happen. So it really, it definitely goes deep into areas like that you would never think of. And, I think it all goes back to the start of this call. No business is the same. And that's I think the importance of really kind of consulting with an insurance professional. Where are my exposures? I mean, you might not think about this stuff, but by consulting and it makes it easier for me to have a specific case so that I can really dive down and say, ooh, this could happen, that could happen. Maybe we should look at protecting you for this area. Yeah, I think that really reinforces the start of this call and making sure like where you could have exposures and talking about it with somebody.
Right. Well, and another line of insurance that is important as well as data breach, and we've heard about people's emails being hacked or the big corporations or medical company information being hacked. So is data breach important just for like the big companies that seem like they're the targets, or should little companies be concerned about that too and have that coverage? Like, what is your recommendation for that data breach coverage?
If you asked me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'd say, yeah, the Targets of the world or Walmarts. I mean, those are the guys that got to be worried. But I hate to say, I feel like a doomsday. Everything I'm telling you here as a small business, you got to like watch out for everything. But yeah, it's now becoming a big problem for small businesses. I mean,
Right.
I think hackers are starting to target those that maybe aren't as seasoned in protecting their data. They can gain easier access, so they're going for it. You
Right.
might have the big organizations. No matter how hard you try and protect what you have, these hackers seem to find a way in. But
Right.
I think they're finding, and stats are showing that some of these small businesses are just kind of caught, with their pants down, not really kind of like being concerned about this stuff. And we're seeing it. I mean, the biggest claims right now are coming like from a ransomware standpoint, which is if they can kind of access your system and then basically hold you hostage, whether they can shut down the cloud that you're on, or shut down your terminals until you pay them money to make them go away. And that they also say social engineering, if you can believe it. I mean, these they put together these emails like, so and so, like they're the CFO of another company, wired me this money for this trade.
Right.
You kind of like seem to find a way to monitor what you're doing, and they get people to take the bait. As crazy as it sounds, it happens so much. It's one of the top two claims. But yeah, so that's just a whole other realm, and COVID's really enhancing
For sure.
the need to carry this stuff. Yeah, because they are talking, more people are working electronically, remotely. Human error and clicking on links and starting viruses in your computer is the number one way they grant access to your computer, and they're getting people to do it. So unfortunately, small businesses are being targeted now, and I guess you could say, it's not. Everybody should have it, but it's a luxury in a sense. It comes at a cost to have the coverage, but it's just becoming as important as general liability these days in many ways. They can shut you down and for good if you're not careful.
Right. Well, even emails that we used to get, and you'd be like, oh, there's tons of spelling errors, or it's obviously, it's coming from like a different email address. It's not a valid email address, but it seems like things are getting more sophisticated. And I know I'd heard a story recently where somehow these hackers actually got the bank information that they use and even knew the person that was their main banker's name, but just made like one spelling error in it. But it was, like you said, one of those wire requests, and it looked completely valid, but the employee just happened to notice like that one spelling error, and then went to the CFO and said, hey, did you really want me to like wire this to the bank? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So thankfully, like, they were safe. But it just seems like they're getting more information or know exactly what you're doing. Like they know more of your normal day-to-day stuff too. So it's not as obvious when something comes in that's fraudulent. So we really have to be careful.
I mean, it's funny that we're talking about this. I mean, even from a personal standpoint, and here we are recording this right here before Christmas. I bought some gifts I've been buying gifts online. I got an email, I think like 2 days ago. It said it was from Nordstrom, and here, claim your $15 voucher coupon or something. And I'm like, wow, it looked like everything looked totally legit. And then I looked at the URL on it, and I noticed it was like www.cie.nord, and I just right there, it's just like, you just kind of have to be really wary of like what you're clicking on. It sounded kind of too good to be true. And yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, it can catch you with you just put your guard down, and one click of an inappropriate link and can cause havoc.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's definitely ramping up right now and becoming and I'll tell this story. I think I told this one on our prior discussion, but even not a very big client of ours, you only have 6-7 employees, but they got a ransomware situation where someone got into their system, basically shut them down. They said, we demand X amount of dollars, or you're going to be crippled and paralyzed. And they got into some of their clients' information as well. Luckily, they had $1 million cyber liability policy. Right on the spot, it paid $300,000 in ransom. But that was not all. They already had gotten into the system. After that ransom is paid and trying to get the hackers out of there, then you have to go through all the process of recuperating your data, buttoning up. These kind of like employment practices policies have like the added resources of a HR component.
Right.
Of cyber policies are not just you don't just buy the policy to pay damages. They actually have a team of IT professionals that kind of patch your systems,
Mm.
If there are parties that were affected by the breach, they have to help, they send out notices, pay their credit monitoring.
Right.
Sometimes it's a bad PR situation for companies, and they need to have a PR team to kind of put out the damage of your business got hacked. So there's a lot of, after the hack happens, it's a long process of getting back to normal again. And that particular client, I think they had $1 million policy, but at the end of the day, the claim itself, I think, was a $1.3 million claim, and they still
Wow.
had to come out of pocket. So, I mean, it just goes to show you don't have to be a big fish like a Target or a Walmart. I mean, if you're exposed and they can find you, I mean, they'll find a way to, it's hard to believe that there's a $1 billion industry in there and how they're able to get money like this through the cyber cryptocurrencies and stuff, but it happens, and it's an unfortunate part of the world we live in right now.
Right. And I think, touching on that whole thing too about it used to be the bigger companies, but I think because a lot of smaller companies don't necessarily know everything they need to do to protect themselves or pay, IT consultants to help them, like they're easier targets to break into, which is unfortunate, but that's why you need to make sure that you've got some type of protection because you may be attacked, and we don't really want to think about that, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
Mm-hmm. So I know you touched on earlier about like the cost of insurance and, what kind of the amounts that deductibles or things might be, but I know there's no like set number per se, but if you could give maybe like ranges of what insurance might cost for someone. So if they're interested in getting these type of policies, they kind of know like what it might be.
Yeah. So depending on basically probably the biggest way a carrier is going to determine your premium is looking either at your gross sales or your payroll.
Mm-hmm.
As you can imagine, you talk about, let's just go back to general liability and work comp, because those are the first two we talked about, probably the most common forms of insurance. If you're a bookkeeper, an accountant, or you're a general contractor, they're going to rate both of you guys on what your annual sales or payroll are.
Mm-hmm.
But as for general liability, that rate for a general contractor might be $20 for every $1,000 in gross revenues, whereas a bookkeeper can be $10, like 50 cents. I mean, they're just really rating your exposure based on risk. So at the end of the day, they're going to rate you on the volume of business you do by either payroll or gross sales. But depending on what industry you're in, your rate for a professional service office for an employment practices, for an errors and omissions policy is going to be much greater than a contractor would pay. But a contractor is going to pay a lot more in work comp or general liability than you would as a bookkeeper. So it's all kind of, the big picture is tough to tell, but you're talking about a home-based business,
right?
Small home-based business, maybe a consulting business. I mean, you might be looking at a $500 general liability policy that gives you up to $2 million aggregate coverage for $500. You might have an errors and omissions policy for $1,500 a year, and that would be it. Small business wise, I mean, max couple $1,000s a year, if that. But again, I don't want to sound vague or anything, but it's not one size fits all. Yeah, it is. And I get that question all the time. It's a little bit easier if I know specifically what industry and everything, but I've been caught, like, I'll give it my guess and then we get quotes and I'm like, oh geez, why did I even tell them that? Because I was way off. There's little things here and there that the underwriters are really looking deeper at. And it's an easier answer I can give you if I know a little bit more about you specifically, but just talking about anybody and everybody, gosh, it ranges so greatly. Depending on so many factors.
Right. Well, I know you were just talking about like coverage amounts too. So can you maybe just explain like what a typical business, a small business owner, might want for that coverage versus like a larger amount too? Because sometimes I think that's just confusing. Like, how do I know how much coverage I really need?
Great question. And it would be nice if we had some calculator to know exactly what my future risk is going to be. By default, I guess you could say the standard limits that most carry, and what you'll see in most contracts would be like, say $1 million in coverage for general liability, errors and omissions. But sometimes companies, like large organizations that are continuously hiring consultants and whoever is doing the job, they have this kind of cookie cutter template of, you must carry this, that, and everything else. I mean, sometimes they're outrageous. You'll see insurance requirements. I need you to carry 5 million in liability, 10 million in cyber. We find too, I mean, those insurance requirements are very negotiable. I mean, if it depends, it's entirely what kind of scope of work you're doing for an organization or what line of business you're in. We'll get calls a lot of times saying, hey, Jimmy, look here's my 3-page Word document of all the insurance I need to carry for this contract. Start peeling the onion back, and hey guys, I give a lot of advice saying, maybe you don't have any employees. You shouldn't have to carry work comp. It's not required by law. Why would it be required in this contract? I think a lot of times people can take that preliminary advice, go back to the person that's requiring certain amounts of coverage, and it's always negotiable. But I'd say like $1 million policies are usually the standard, and then that goes for general liability, professional liability, but you're doing larger jobs or projects, or you're dealing with more sensitive situations. Maybe the job that you're doing has a lot of sensitive information, and they want you to carry 10 million in cyber. I mean, there's no negotiation at times, but $1 million is kind of like the I guess the norm. Okay. What you see in recontracts and what most carry, and you see it a lot in general liability. 1 million per occurrence, 2 million aggregate. That just means in any one claim, the most that a carrier would pay out is $1 million. Aggregate means the most in a policy year. So you could have 3 claims for like 500,000. You're still under that 2 million aggregate for the year. So it's kind of a common 1 million, 2 million limits that you see a lot and people ask about.
So earlier when you were talking about EPLI too, you said like sometimes like, oh, if they use this HR resource, they might have a lower deductible or something. Is there any other way that someone could save, on their insurance policies, or is that pretty much the one way?
Deductible is a big way. It fluctuates too. You can show a carrier a lot. I mean, by default, carriers want to know, they have a pretty standard application or template of what they want to know about a given insured. But if you can even show even more above and beyond, here's what I have: these protocols in place. I have these contracts in place with the people that I work with. If you're showing you have a lot of risk transfer, risk management measures in place that you could share with underwriters, everything's negotiable. I mean, the prices that they give on premiums isn't just like everybody gets the same price. I mean, if you're really, obviously loss history is a big thing for them, but if you show you have a lot of protocols and measures in place, again, whether it be you're entering into contracts with people, like maybe attorney drafted contracts, you talk about work comp, if you have safety measures, risk management measures in place to help prevent injuries from happening. If you show this to carriers, I mean, you can really drive the cost down on your insurance, but you have to prove it. And if on the other hand, if you're just kind of reckless, you kind of fly by the seat of your pants, you don't have any, no, I don't do anything, I just got lucky, I haven't had any claims. I mean, that's gonna, they're gonna either not want to write the insurance or your costs are gonna be much higher. So yeah, it's just, it depends how buttoned up you are running your business. If you're really want to do your best to prevent this from all happening, I mean, your costs are going to come down big time. And usually when you're putting all these measures together to protect yourself from risk, the stats will show you probably don't have many claims, or the claims are very few and far between. And if you want to talk about saving money on operational costs, you have the control to do that. You just really need to make sure you have good measures in place and have that passion to protect yourself. It's right. I talk to a lot of proud business owners that are very good in every way about how they run their business. And, there's kind of crazy, but there's some out there that just might be very successful, but wow, it's like you could probably be doing a lot more to protect yourself. It's kind of crazy to think, wow, nothing's really happened to you yet, but you should really do a lot more to protect your business, and you will see the costs come down by doing so. So
Nice.
see
Yeah,
it all.
that's great information, because I think a lot of times people just think, you get a quote, there's the price, and not necessarily
Yeah.
knowing, like, if I do this, this, and this, it could actually reduce the price. I think that's fabulous information for sharing, with.
You couldn't be closer to the truth. I mean, it's really, really not in this world. I mean, it's like everything else. I mean, for us as insurance agents or brokers, I mean, it's like we're in the kind of the middle. I mean, we're trying to like sell to our client, but we're also, once we have a client that wants to work with us, I mean, we're having to sell a lot to the carriers. And
Mhm.
I might have one client, but I'm going to 5 carriers and I'm talking to 5 underwriters, and it's one thing I can coach my clients on. If you can show me these things, we can probably get your price down a lot more. It's not one size fits all. You can't just go online and buy. You can in some cases go buy a policy, but
Right.
if you're working with someone to help kind of hold your hand and put measures in place, we can definitely negotiate premiums to be lower by showing the underwriters and the carriers what you're doing to protect yourself from risk.
Okay. So if someone's ready to get some insurance that they haven't already had, they want to add, a policy, or maybe they're a brand new business just starting out, how can one get business insurance?
There's so many outlets you can turn to. I mean, if you're a small business, I'm sure there's now a lot of these InsurTech online links that you can go buy for yourself. But I mean, honestly, the best way, in my opinion, I may be a little biased, but working with an independent broker, and I say independent broker specifically, is because I'm an independent broker, but we basically have access to all these multiple carriers. We can go out to market, find what's best for you in terms of coverage and price. And we don't have to put a broker fee on most of our policies. I mean, in many cases, it's like the carriers are compensating us to place the business with them. So you have the luxury of working with somebody to go out to market and find you the best coverage. And you're not paying any more than you would just to go buy it yourself. So I encourage most to maybe approach an independent broker. And that way you don't really have to go call 5 different brokers to get 5 different quotes. I mean, one can get you everything you need to see, as long as you trust them and what they're doing.
Right.
For businesses particularly, I mean, it's a lot different than a home or personal auto policy. Business is a lot more complex, and to have the consultation of a seasoned professional and then have them take it out to market to find you what you need that's best for you it's the way to go.
Right. Well, and I think that's good information for people to know too, because I think there might be this misconception that it is going to cost more because I have to pay, the premium, plus I have to pay a percentage, to the broker. So having that information where if they come to you, it's, the same, then they know they have that professional, information from you that helps them make the right decision, and it's not going to cost extra.
Right. And I can say too, like there are those circumstances where a small broker fee might need to be added, but honestly, I can attest that the work that is being done by the broker to help negotiate price to get that price down, I mean, it pays for itself. It really does. I mean, if you didn't have the guidance of a broker, you might not know it, but you're paying an extra $1,000. Where if you got that consulting from a broker, they might charge $150 broker fee, but you also saved $1,000 behind it. Those are things that really alleviate the pain. But again, it's really more on the they call them excess and surplus policies. We don't need to go there, but more often than not, broker fees aren't. You don't have to worry about them as a policyholder. And I wouldn't want people to be discouraged that working with the broker automatically costs more, because that's definitely not the case.
Right. And so one other question I just had while we were, talking, I was thinking with, the insurance needs, and we were talking before about sometimes it's based on your revenue or your payroll. With things happening now, I mean, some businesses are actually taking off. They've actually, benefited from kind of the chaos that's going on right now due to the pandemic. And then some have had major hits, so should they be looking at changing insurance because of what's happening in their business? Or, when really should they be looking at changing insurance at all because of things that are happening in their business?
Another great question. Yeah, we're living in a time that we've not seen before. And with that being said, and this is where we've had to go this whole year as brokers for our clients. Yeah, some are getting busier, and we talked about sales being a big part of what your premiums are going to be. We might need to adjust their sales up or down amidst all this, so that they're not nailed with the big audit at the end of their policy terms. People have had to cut employees, unfortunately. If there's significant change happening right now, no doubt contact your insurance professional, because with the way your exposure changes, it will change the cost that you're paying as well. I mean, if you're having a hard time, well, the carriers right now are being as flexible as ever on changing their policies now, so that they're not charging an arm and a leg. We've had to adjust payrolls way down, sales way down, and able to keep the policy active, but just a reflection of where they are today. And the same applies to those businesses that are super busy. I mean, they might be buying more insurance, but there's never a time. You don't need to just worry about when your policy is renewing to look it over. And you can call your broker anytime, because things can be done midterm anytime. If your business is changing, it's smart to pick up the phone and call. Or if you feel like, I'm unsure, do I need to call? Just call and get the guidance, because it's not like you can only do that. It's not like buying a group health policy where you have open enrollment one time a year. No, with these types of policies, things can be adjusted at any point to reflect changes in your own business.
Right. Well, that's great information too. So thank you for sharing that. And I know we've covered a lot of different types of policies, and we probably just scratched the surface on some of it too, but I did want to have this conversation to really educate people on the different types of insurance and things that they probably should be looking into. It may not apply, to every business, but at least knowing kind of what those coverages are. So I wanted to thank you for joining me on the show today.
Well, I always love talking with you. Thank you for bringing me on a second time. I mean, I get a little passionate about this. I can talk a lot, but it's great. I was, with me being an insurance nerd, I could probably talk for hours about it all. But honing it down to this little window has been great.
Right. Well, is there anything that you have as an offer you would like to share to those listeners now that we're coming to the end of the show?
Most definitely. I mean, if you have insurance in place now or not at all, simply have questions, might have a policy that you know nothing about, or want a set of eyeballs to look it over, review, and just give some honest feedback. That comes at no cost for me to do a review of any sort, whether you have an existing policy, don't have any at all. Again, I'm just, that's what I do. And no cost for me to just look over and give you the guidance or advice that you want on your own business insurance.
Perfect. And if someone wants to do that, how would they connect with you?
Best would be to either call me at my office, which is area code 310-373-6441. My extension is 227. I actually should be a little bit better about it, but I do have my own site, my blog. It's just www.jimkinmartin.com, Jim, my last name, KINMARTIN.com. Or my agency is ISU, Olson Duncan Insurance. We are based primarily out of Torrance, but our website is olsonduncan.com, OLSON Duncan.com. Those are the big areas, and you should be able to track down my information from there if you have any questions.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, like I said, for being a guest. And I wanted to thank the listeners for tuning in to this episode today. I hope you found this topic interesting and it did help answer some of the questions that you may have regarding the types of insurance you need to protect your business. If you have any additional questions or comments, feel free to reach out to Jim at any of those methods that he gave to you. Or of course, you can send us a message at media@abandp.com. And would you please share this podcast with those you know? I'd greatly appreciate your support. Next week's topic is virtual selling in a digital era. I hope you can join us for this presentation. And remember, you can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And my website is abandp.com. You can also find the podcast posted on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Until next time, have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next Tuesday. Have a terrific week.